Hi, I'm Rick Anthony, and welcome to the Someone You Should Know podcast, the podcast that focuses on musicians, authors, and interesting people. We like to say we're making a difference one artist at a time. So sit back, have a cold one, and get ready to meet someone you should know. Today's podcast guest is an industry-recognized competitive intelligence expert. His media team reaches more than 140 million U.S. households and global radio listeners. He works with an industry titans such as Live Nation and Amazon Prime, Verizon, AT&T, and so much more. And besides that, he's also a rock star. Will you please welcome Robbie Zeas, also known as Robbie Phoenixx. Welcome.
Hey, gang. Hey, gang.
Welcome aboard. Now, I got to ask you first off, Robbie, the chicken or the egg? Did the success in music help build your business capabilities, or vice versa? Did you do so good in business that you could afford to be a rock star?
Well, let's start where it starts. I was in my brother's bedroom many an evening and afternoon hearing him play electric guitar as a young teenager, and really hearing bands at the time like Journey, Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne. You know, I could go down a list of accomplished guitarists he was emulating. And later in life, I became a bandmate to him for 6 years and then punted an original project for about 2. Then I found the love of my life, a career, and then came back to the music. So I would say, I think the creative spark was there innately in the beginning of all things, and then it just kind of evolved into something more meaningful as I had a career.
Wonderful, wonderful. How about your humble roots? Where'd you grow up? And tell us a little bit more about your family life and how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. I mean, talk about flying by the seat of your pants. That has been my life since free-spirited. So much to the chagrin of my upbringing, you know, my dad was a rather accomplished senior economist at the International Monetary Fund.
Jeez.
And had a truly meteoric career. In fact, he was always the very top of his class every single year, literally, since he was very young, and earned his way competing for a scholarship of 10,000 applicants to come to the States and learn at Harvard, in fact. And they got him into the admissions office and they go, well, James, we're very sorry to share. We filled our quota for minorities. So how about a reciprocal agreement with MSU and you can be there 4 years instead of the 1 year here? And he's like, sure. So I think to the chagrin of my father and his truly accomplished background, I kind of decided to go my own way, and it started in tech. And like all humble beginnings, when you're kind of off on your own and away from your family and your roots, I moved from Bethesda to Philadelphia at the time. My wife paid my ability to have a career coming out of college. So it was turnpike, 104 miles every single day.
Oh my.
And it was about $20 a day in commute cost minimum between the gas and the tolls. And she was making $15 an hour. So can you imagine the multiple on that? I was living in my in-laws' house.
Yeah.
And a few months later, we saved for our first apartment. A year later from that, our second apartment. And it just kind of came from there. And I first credit my wife for having a career. I credit my father for inspiring me to do more in all things that I put my hand to humbly. And I also credit the team around my success in corporate life, particularly. I had a team of 15 people that were kind of hand selected through, you know, relationship building and otherwise just work relationships to allow myself to be a top salesperson nationwide at Verizon Business for 3 years consecutively. That was the beginning of my career. And you can see the percentages on my LinkedIn profile. It was like 112% the first year. Mm-hmm. Was it 400+% the next year?
It was very impressive numbers, folks. I'll include the LinkedIn down in the show notes for you to check out yourself. This guy is just fabulous. He's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is all about building the team. If there's one thing I can share with your listeners is, you know, when you go into any work environment, there's always a team implied in what you're doing. And the key is to connect with that team and hopefully inspire them to have a better day as a starting point, and then inspire them to do a little more. And then it's like, watch what happens with your clients or with your end products, with your results. And that's literally all it was. And ultimately, the IT teams would come in as a pit crew and give me more RAM for my hard drive more RAM for my computing and more hard drive space. I was running macros to automate some of my workflow. And then I was learning, like voluminous learning. I'd bring reading home almost every weekend on products to become more of an expert, at least a subject matter expert in certain products, and working closely with the product management team. And then it was learning about all the systems and the billing and the provisioning and special circuit systems. And so ultimately, all this recipe became 15 people around me that recognized I was taking initiative and caring deeply for what I was doing, and ultimately became rather successful.
Awesome. Very good. I'm just fascinated by what you've done and the fact that you can juggle two different lives as far as it goes, music and also the corporate world. There's a lot of managers listening in their cars on the way to work right now. What is the biggest faux pas that many leaders make when motivating their teams, and they don't even realize it?
Don't get caught up in the schedules. Don't get caught up in reports. Mm-hmm. Don't get caught up in the formality that businesses truly require, right? There's a certain discipline in reporting, introspection, developmental plans. There's a lot of administrative burden in being a leader in a business. In my particular case, it was a tech field. And a lot of the younger people that were bright potential got very bored very quickly on the whole idea of, I've got a 3-page report to submit every quarter. And I'm reporting weekly to you. Like, what's the deal? And I'd say, look, put the reports aside. Let's just shred it. I don't even care about your report. I care a lot more about what you're learning and where you want to be. Why are you here and where do you want to be? Those are the two things I'd ask every single person I worked with as a starting point in the relationship. Because for me, an effective leader, or at least an effective manager, was getting them to where they wanted to be because of where they were. They chose to be there for reasons. You got to understand that and understand it not only on a business level, but on a skill set level, on an experience level, on a passion level, on even a personal level. If you're doing it well, I always invested personally in my team where I could, and also where I was asked, to take them a little further in life. And that's the key to being good management. To be good leader, though, to me is a little bit cut above. It's got to be a little more than just, okay, they made top 10% in the pecking order for sales, or they're learning something truly unique in their role and they're contributing uniquely in role. It's what are they really doing to differentiate themselves? And that takes some knowledge of themselves and some developmental work that is another layer still. And if you're bringing that all together, and it happens on teams, I can assure you, even in boring tech companies like Verizon, no offense, Verizon, you can innovate, and you can cross that Rubicon to inspire people to actually innovate in what they're doing. And that's where it gets super exciting, where you begin to hear things like, hey, you've won this award, or, you've earned a top ranking this year for this and that. And it's a humble thing. It really is. And it's all through the people around you at that point, obviously, to make that happen. And
your employees all have some type of creative talent. What's a great way for managers to tap into those talents?
I used to start with a boring kind of like Glengarry Glen Ross whiteboard, and I'd go, all right, guys, why are you here? Where do you want to be? And then I'd go through like the whole like layer of sales philosophy. It'd start with, pricing at the bottom, features, benefits, the next step, application and understanding of the client needs. And then you really go to the kumbaya, which is you actually have the relationship and trust with them. And so I'd walk them through the psychographs of this relationship aspiration they would build inside of their workbenches, whether they were in sales or in engineering. And ultimately, it led to a lot of interesting conversation because they'd bring in anecdotes from their week and they'd say, hey, look, I had this situation. This client was rather dissatisfied and they've been stuck in a billing issue for months. And we were able to at least get it referred into the account team to help with this and resolve, or it was maybe a bad installation, and it was like days out of service or something. And you can slowly see it starts turning around because I brought 15 people to their doorstep, literally, that could help them in any variety of issues. And it was just helpful to facilitate the conversation. Well, how can you turn that relationship, because you brought them from what was a very painful experience into, hey, you're going to be accountable. You're going to take it on the chin a little in that process, yet you may end up being a hero. You may be someone that they may glorify and say, well, that faceless company that has hundreds of thousands of employees, this person actually stood up for me and cared and walked it through end to end and kept me appraised. And I did not have to lift a phone or send an email because they were taking care of it for me. So there was a little bit of that. And I think that's part of the secret in the sauce, if you will.
There you go. Very good. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. Now, before we continue with our interview, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to the Someone You Should Know podcast. We're on the web at SomeoneYouShouldKnowPodcast.com. There you're going to find recent news, our archive of past episodes, and a whole lot more. And if you happen to be visiting, on the front page, go on down to the bottom and leave us a review. We really and truly appreciate your comments, good and bad, how we can improve the show, and what you like about the show. We're very, very blessed to reach out. So many cities around the world have tuned in, 1,700 cities so far, according to Buzzsprout, who manages all of our uploads and such. 80 countries around the world. We want to salute a couple: Air, Massachusetts; Redondo Beach, California; and Brighton and Hove in the United Kingdom. The Someone You Should Know podcast is heard wherever quality streaming audio is available. As we return to our interview here with Robbie Zeas, also known as Robbie Phoenixx. We've been talking about the corporate side. Let's continue with that. Common elements that you would see in the corporate world that are also in the music and entertainment world.
You know, honestly, they're not so distinct in my experience. You know, like, you start in business and you learn the rudiments of, well, it's pricing and it's product and it's expertise in product and it's building teams and it's some innovation at the ground level, learning how to run campaigns or design campaigns. The interdependencies and the risks involved with that are pretty significant when you think of the millions of dollars that shell out of these companies in the marketing line every year. And then in the music industry, well, you've got similar structural impediments to success, right? They're just parallels. They're just manifest differently. So who's selling CDs anymore? Nobody, right? So artists aren't going to make their bread or run their tour bus, with hundreds of dollars of diesel per tank by selling CDs. And it's probably not the T-shirts, right? The tchotchkes that you're selling at the table after the show or after your performance. Even if you're opening for a major act, you may sell 5% of that crowd something, right? If you're lucky.
Absolutely.
So what's it going to be, And like, to me, the structural issue there was, okay, if you're not making enough the sale of your music the way you used to, and you're not making enough of merch, that used to be 70% of the artist's magic number that they'd make their living on.
Right.
I decided to not go through the club routine and get beat up there by promoters that want you to sell tickets like Guns N' Roses style in the 80s. And I didn't want to get, also for that matter, fatigued with having constant, calendar triage to figure out which club and which setting is best for you to slot in and compete at that level. I said, I'm just going to go to filmmakers, because every film that gets released is hitting millions of eyeballs and ears. And why would I know it's a longer play, mind you. It takes a certain level of patience as an artist to sit back and wait for these deals to be structured, to be resourced, to be named, to be contracted, to be implemented in post-production, to be distributed, and then your results start popping up on IMDb. However, the long play has its reward as well, which is we bridged a relationship with an independent filmmaker, had a 5 mini episode series, I should say, that led to over 30 million song plays and a daytime Emmy submission, that led to a relationship to work with Live Nation in a premiere property in Las Vegas to film. We're the only band that was ever receiving permission to film. And that was after, in the wake of the tragedy at the iHeart Music Festival massacre. So it led to good things. It's always a structural thing. You want to look at these environments, and the parallels are always, to me, the secret in my sauce is leverage your creative advantage for your competitive advantage. So if you're a creative, and you're creative, you've got a studio or you've got a palette of something to create your art or your output to the public, you got to really break it down and also consider creatively in the business how you're going to approach that industry in a way that's unique, that's going to add value around you, and also create in that potentially some authority in the fact that you did it that way and you put your imprint on the world, rather than following the flock down to the Spotifys and the promoters, and you're literally potentially selling your soul in the process and not really making the income you hoped.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Speaking of that, I talk to hundreds of musicians, many of whom are still working minimum wage jobs to fund their habit of playing club gigs on the weekend. What advice would you tell a musician listening right now who really and truly wants to live better on their means as far as that goes, to be able to make a living and also be a performer? What would you recommend?
This is why I'm grateful I had two parents. I was very fortunate to be that person. And my mother was highly creative and incredibly adaptive and a heart of the gold, literally. And my father was very business oriented and very practical and always seeking authority in any realm he navigated in life. So my best advice to individuals based on my upbringing and my experience is this: go beyond. How many artists do we see? They plague themselves with tattoos and woe is me. And, oh, my dad is bad, or my mom did this to me, or I was left on the curb, or this and that. It's a pity party out there. Like, to be honest, when I look at artists, I kind of inside myself wonder how truly dedicated they are to what it is they say that they want to do. And the go beyond, to me, in my experience, and it may be different for your listeners, and that's perfectly fine, but it was going beyond and saying, getting a corporate job isn't selling my soul. It's putting food on the table. It's allowing me to take vacations. It's allowing me to resource production. I had 4 separate independent filming rounds that took place, incidentally, as an executive producer, learning the rudiments of how to be an executive producer. And I assure you, I don't have to go to labels and ask for a handout for development dollars or P&A budgets, like, basically advertising budgets. I can bring that to the table as finished content and say, let's strike a partnership. Let's not necessarily go the route of Spotify, trying to sell CDs and good luck and good day. The corporate side allowed me to do things I never could have done on my own. And if you think being an artist is all about working in a diner or hardware store and selling your soul to that, while you sit there and want to glorify your art, I think you're really sorely misguided. The world always conditions us, like film and TV. Oh, if you're the broke artist, someone's going to find you and recognize your talent. And maybe you work at a Guitar Center because, well, it's compatible to your lifestyle. I'd say go beyond. Push yourself into realms you're not comfortable in. I can promise your listeners, I was not signed up to be a tour bus owner, operator, maintainer when I started this run. And I had pushed myself to over 45,000 miles on the road. Jeez. And 3 breakdowns in the process, incidentally. There were very stressful moments. And yes, they were very much like Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
And this is it. Go beyond. Prove it. Bring it to the table and show that you can do more and show that you can do a little better, hopefully, in that.
There you go. I'm the same way with radio. I've been in the radio for all my life. And I did it because I loved it. I'm doing this show because I love it, and that's just it. As far as I didn't make a king's ransom in radio. I made it okay wages as far as that goes, but I did it because I loved it. I showed up every day for it because I loved talking to people. I loved playing those songs. I loved coming up with creativity. It's all because you love it. If you love radio, if you love music, if you love working at a 7-Eleven, so be it. Whatever it is, have some passion for what you're doing. There's so many people out there who show up and collect a paycheck. And that's just it. They look forward to the weekends, and it's, oh, God, here comes Monday again, and I got to do that stupid job that I'm doing. No. Actually, you got to love it. Take some commitment into what you're doing, into your profession, into your future and such. I love what you said there, Robbie. That's great stuff there. Let's talk about Robbie the musician now. And let's talk about some of the bands you opened for. I saw in your notes Stone Sour was one you opened for. Let's talk about some of the bands that you opened for and talk about those gigs in particular, okay?
Sure, and it's like every probably group that's out there under the face of the sun, right? Like we started with playing little clubs that were key to influencers in market. We're in Denver. Like by reputation, some artists in the rock genre, especially in original rock, go, this market sucks. Like, this is not where you want to break a band. It's almost like Corey Taylor coming out of the Midwest, where the Cornhuskers are. And it's by grace of God he ever made it out of that market. It's similar in Denver. So we started in the clubs that had influence, and the club owners would talk to promoters. We did that for a little while and realized, this is kind of bunk because, these are clubs that are probably 40, 50 years old with no standing audience. Yet they want us to play on a Sunday just to prove we're musically competent. Okay, checklist. Then we went to the next level and we started asking ourselves, which stages do we want to play on? Actually, now that we're more of a polished band, we have a full set plus worth of material. What's the next step? And we started going to the regional clubs that had reputation for national bands coming in, commanding a premium on a book value to perform their show. and they'd bug out. Well, we're like, okay, cool. So we played Herman's Hideaway. Then we found Sunshine Studios in Colorado Springs. And we started realizing some of this local touch with promoters can't hurt, provided their terms are kind of reasonable, right? Like, you just sell tickets is one thing, but get us in front of like the national acts that are coming in that have a draw that we're playing to 300 plus people a show. And that got cool. Mm-hmm. And that led to greater things. Still, we decided to off it to go and do a New York tour. And literally we're pulling into Coney Island with a big ass tour bus in the middle of Brooklyn, mind you. It's impossible to get this bus around, and somehow we're just getting it done. The people on the street gawking at us like, what is this thing? What is it? You want to park this here? Get lost. And we're like, we're cool. We're artists. We're just going to like, until you get in our face and give us a ticket, we're just going to like have to do what we have to do. Right. Mm-hmm. So we unload, and sure enough, Jack White was just finishing up.
I love it. Love it.
And it's the green room. So, my artists are pouring in there. They're bringing in all this equipment, and I'm just getting the bus turned around trying to find somewhere to park this thing. It's impossible, right? And so I come back in, and my guys go, you just missed Jack White. And I'm like, no, like this. So that was one of the moments we go, wow. Yeah. Another was we actually had an opportunity to support the album release for Royal Bliss. They're out of Salt Lake City, and they've been steadily growing their audience over recent years. And admirably, even through COVID, they did a phenomenal job putting content out online and continuing that audience to be stimulated with their music and with their presence and their brand, and even in their support of charities. Ultimately, we opened for them in Colorado Springs at Sunshine Studios. I remember this is at a point where our show was truly maturing because we really knew our songs, we knew our set list, we knew our routines, we knew our stage presence pretty well. And literally the club owner comes up side stage, shakes our hand, because we'd like to have you back. And I'm like, cool, right? Cool. Tony Corbett's cool. That's awesome. And I guess Christine liked us enough that her father came up, and the front of house guy goes, you know that audio device you had for vocal on stage? I don't know that I'd recommend it because front of house didn't like that too much. We couldn't hear you too well. So there's always humility, when you evolve from like the single club scene and the guys just don't have the audience packed and it's a Sunday to you start self-selecting stages and you go, if we're going to bother to be in the clubs to kind of rudimentarily build our sound and understand, your presence on stage and the lighting and all the things that integrate to your show, and ultimately becomes, okay, let's go to the promoters and tell them we have a little more leverage than we had, say, 6 months ago. And we want to be on the stages where the actual artists are rolling into town, the legit ones, right?
Right, yeah.
And that was what I call select engagement model. It's not for everyone, but I will say to artists, look, you can go sell your soul and you can sell tickets and make nothing. And every promoter in town's going to know they're like little sharks or man-eating people, and they'll eat you for their lunch, literally, and not care. So, have a little faith in what you're doing. It takes time. And it is a little bit of a long play in this sense, too. The filmmaking was the super long play. Yet I'll tell you, the rewards are better, and you're not going to have to sell your soul and worry about your reputation in a market because you've already sold yourself, 20 times, right? Basically. I should also mention, it's important to also consider the whole idea about, how do you coordinate with the clubs that you perform in? Like, get to know from their perspective what is really going on, right? Like, try to ask the bartenders a little bit about tap takeovers or a little bit about how they place their advertising and where they advertise and why, what works and why, what doesn't work and why. Because every venue owner is going to go through, if they trust you enough, they're going to open up and say, hey, we started with a simple ad insert in the Gazette, and we just consistently, and it built people to come take our menu specials. And from there, once you've got the menu and you maybe have a game or something on and it's big TVs, you basically can run a whole bunch of complimentary specials to the fact you brought them in and lured them on a cheap drink, basically. Right. And then from there, they can build audience with their artists and say, well, now that we have a standing community of people that show up, maybe we have a night that we'll carve off for music. And maybe it'll be better than just some square stage that's like 10 by 12.
I know.
Just
barely big enough for barely big enough for your drum kit. That's it. Yeah, I've seen seen so many of those where the guitar falls off the stage at one point because he's trying to get one foot up on the stage. Jeez. Let's talk about you started to allude to this earlier about the buses breaking down. There's a feature that I've included for decades called Tales from the Road, the infamous road stories of getting to a gig, something that happened on a stage. You plug in and the fuse blows and the whole building goes out or whatever like that. Those Spinal Tap moments. What would you say? You started mentioning the buses, so maybe we'll start there and then maybe build from there. What would be your Tales from the Road?
So this is a good segue into a question you asked earlier, and I'll be brief because we're visiting really on the tail part at this point. I whiteboarded with my bandmates upstairs in my living room a couple of years ago. We said, what would it take to tour? What is the resourcing plan to make a tour happen? So we went through, the flights, the hotel, the ground transportation, this and that. We came up with a number that was roughly $3,050 a night for 4 people to travel. If we were traveling the way we would choose to travel, not first class, mind you, but just, Best Western and above. And so we said, okay, well, why don't we get a tour bus? Because if you get a van, you're all crammed in there. There's no shower. You can't really sleep in the thing. I mean, you can, but you really probably shouldn't consistently for weeks. So we got a tour bus. And this tour bus is a late 80s model. And of course, when you pick up the bus from the owner, he's like, hey, let's go to the Walmart parking lot and I'll teach you how to drive. And I'm like, okay. So he's like, okay, take the brake off and put your foot on the diesel gas. And I'm like, okay. And we go like 2 miles an hour because I'm just scared out of my mind to drive a 40,000 pound piece of steel. We turn it around on a U-turn and he goes, okay, let's get out of the bus now. And I get out of the bus. He's like, hugs me. You can see he was like completely heartbroken that he had to part with this thing, hands me the key and just rolls off. He's done.
Good Lord.
So I'm in the middle of a Walmart parking lot in Taylor, South Carolina going, how am I going to get this thing home? Because I haven't even been on a highway, a road. I haven't made even like a turn onto anything. Like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I hardly know where the signal light is. So we go to like a Bojangles Chicken and we just figure it out. We're like, all right, I'm going to compose myself. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this happen. We went roughly about 7,000 miles to make it home because we chose to go through Maryland up to Indiana and then back down to Colorado again and through part of the Southwest in the process to sightsee. We get the bus home and it's a fixer-upper, right? I bought her for $34,000 and that was all in for training, for equipment, for some upgrades, all this stuff that he itemized. And ultimately it became, how do we get this tour bus to move? Like, the fuel filter was clogged beyond all recognition.
Oh,
and so these things happen. Like the first year or so that we owned this thing, and I cautioned the band in the studio. At one point, they were pushing me for that New York tour pretty hard. And, they were really wanted to tour. And I said, okay, well, if we tour, this bus isn't ready. Like, we've literally got a steering column that's not affixed properly on the bus. And there's some things that can happen. And this is something I'm learning as I go. So we go down the bus. We're going down the highway. We're all the way through Indiana now. And I'm thinking, wow, cool, man. And we saw a sign for like Casey Kasem's, Abraham Lincoln. And we're like, all right, this is upper Midwest for sure. This is cool. And the next thing you know, and it's like I was driving. So behind me about 4 feet up in the ceiling, all of a sudden I hear this pop and this suction. And there's this light coming into the front of the bus. And I'm like, what the? And one of the passengers looks over. He goes, hey, man, sorry, bro. Like, the roof just blew off, man. It's on the highway somewhere. Like, and I'm like, what are you fucking kidding? And so that was one little thing. We had another moment. Oh, we had plenty. We were driving through Brooklyn. And, of course, the guys don't know anything. And I don't either, by the way. I'm just like, yeah, we'll get to the club in Brooklyn. No biggie. And, the roads start getting more narrow. And they're bridges. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope this app is correct. Like, this is a 14-foot height clearance and it's 45,000 pounds of gross weight. So you got to be on certain bridges and not others. And you don't go on tunnels. We went through the Lincoln Tunnel. Literally, you could hear it was probably an inch or two from the clearance of a rack on top of our bus.
Oh my God.
Like, it sounded like that. It was like, oh my God. It's like, we're just going to hit something and die. Every one of us. It's going to open up like a sardine can. And sure enough, we made it through the Lincoln Tunnel. and I'm learning how to drive a bus. It's a bus, right? It's an RV conversion bus. It's not a truck. It's not a 18-wheeler convoy. And so we see a sign that says trucks, please go straight. And to the right, it says all other vehicles. And we just gotten off this bridge. So I turn right. And sure enough, we go into the parkway. And guess what you don't do on a parkway? You don't bring a bus because they built the bridges that overpass the parkway were built in the 40s, we were told. And they're too short. You can literally rip the top of your bus off, apparently. So thank God the parkway police were there. They pull us over Guns N' Roses style like we were outlaws. They're like, hey, bro, we could basically give you a $10,000 ticket and impound you for another 10 to 15,000. But we understand, you made a mistake and your license is clean, whatevs. We're going to escort you off the parkway.
Thank God.
Squad in the front, squad car in the back. The lights are rolling. They stop traffic. And we're feeling like we're Metallica.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dude, this is like the best thing ever. And sure enough, on our way back from the New York tour, I'm the only crazy one up working, driving the bus because everyone else is snoring away in the back.
Yeah.
And it's like 3 a.m. We're in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. I pull over and I get to the convenience counter where I'm supposed to just, prepay for the diesel fill.
Yeah.
And the clerk's looking at me like this. He's like, which band are you with? Because the bus looks like a rock and roll band for sure. And I'm like, Sonic Octane. He goes, you just missed Metallica 20 minutes ago. Lars Ulrich was taking a shit in the men's room. And, this and that. And I'm like, thanks, man. Thanks.
And
thanks.
Jack White was there too.
So these are like these moments in time you go, this really is a real thing. This is exactly how it's done. We were doing it that way. We were learning the hard way because, can you afford the diesel to your next stop? You better hope you're selling enough T-shirts. You better hope you have the credit line in some cases to allow yourself to continue on to the next town. And you better hope your bandmates have some cashling around.
All right, let's move on to some links to where people can find out more about the business side of you and also the Sonic Octane side of you. If you can shoot us some links, what would be the best ones?
Absolutely. I would start on the business side. You can absolutely connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Robert Zeas. My surname is Zeas, first name Robert. And you'll see me out there as a keynote speaker, yada, yada, competitive intelligence expert. You can also find me on Instagram at Robbie.Phoenixx with a double X at the end. That would also be for competitive intelligence expert. And if you're looking for a way to kick your competitor's butt, that's my expertise of nearly 15 years in Fortune 100 companies, directly contributing $254 million in that role. And if you're looking for Robbie Phoenixx, the artist, you're going to find me in a couple places. So Twitter's our main account. That's, let's see here. Twitter is Sonic Disciples, and that's the tag handle for that.
Okay.
If you're looking for Robbie Phoenixx, the artist, on Facebook, we're at Sonic Octane. And you can also find us under Sonic Octane Band on Facebook.
Awesome. What I'll do is I'll include all those down to the show links. So if you're driving right now, and especially if you're a manager, once again, take the information that he told you earlier and don't worry about those TPS reports, okay? Robbie, any final thoughts, please?
Yeah, I mean, to boil it up a little, for the listeners, first, thank you for being part of our show and being with us. I always say, it's important to have a team. So for all of you out there that need a friend that is in the entertainment industry, knows a little bit about film production, knows a little bit about the music side, and certainly knows a lot about corporate business and how to compete and win, looking at structural gaps and where to fit yourself in a line and be different and stand out, I'm your friend. So feel free to reach out and know that. Also, just say this, I think it's important to leverage that creative advantage for your competitive advantage. And I'll keep sharing that with audiences because I really feel that differentiated me in both the tech realm and in the creative arts realm. So
awesome. Very good. We've been speaking with Robbie Zeas, a.k.a. Robbie Phoenixx with 2 X's. And once again, we thank you so much for being a part of the Someone You Should Know podcast and being part of our growing family, Rob. We do appreciate it.
One love, one music, our world.
Hi, this is Rick Anthony, thanking you again for tuning in to this episode of the Someone You Should Know podcast. Before I go, I want to share some friends of mine who also have a podcast. Give them a listen, and I invite you to check us out next time right here on the Someone You Should Know podcast. All right, here's my friends right now from the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast.
Hey, everybody, it's Ray the Roadie.
And this is Hollywood Mike
with the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast, coming to you from the Illinois Rock and Roll Museum on Route 66 in Joliet, Illinois.
Where once a week we are interviewing local musicians and singer-songwriters. And the podcast itself covers a wide range of topics, including, but not limited to, the history of rock and roll in Chicago, the current state of the scene, and the challenges and opportunities facing musicians today.
So join us every Tuesday for a new exciting episode of the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast.